Alright, here we have Dreamless. Recently, on my community tab, which you're welcome to check out, I asked whether or not you would like to see some other things on dissections. From different light settings to actually checking out tacit discords, a lot of stuff was requested. Starting from the front, you can already see she takes up my entire screen. Her big wings that kind of look like flesh being made up of multiple hands are so wide in her T-pose that it's literally the entire screen. Besides that, you can see she has the iconic tacit core crown, a lot of like tacitite corruption or corrodation all over her, a lot of golden details including claws, as well as linings of doll joints which we'll be looking at later, and scarily detailed feet. I've never actually seen fully modeled feet on the character models because they all wear shoes, or at least some excuse for a shoe. Looking at Camellia and stuff. Looking at the side, again you can see that her wings make up most of her. She actually looks a lot bigger in game in my opinion, but I guess it really was just the wings. Besides that, you have the ear-like head she has, the hair which we'll be looking at in a second, and the rest of her body. Now, as you can see, I didn't bother putting her on the ground as her bone structure or the joints she has don't really allow for that. I could do it, but I feel like this would be easier to look at. Looking at the back, I feel like it is scarier than the front. Aside from the flesh-like wings on the upper back, she has another pair on the lower back, along with dress-like cloth, which I'm not really sure is hair or not, and her actual hair, which we'll be looking at in a second. As an overview, you can't really see much else. Starting from the top, you can already see her wings isn't the only thing taking up the screen. I am zoomed in the normal way I am with other characters, but her crown takes up the entirety of the screen again, really showing just how big this tacit discord is. The main point of her is the headpiece she wears, which is kind of similar to Crownless. It even kind of looks like she just skinned him and took his head, but let's not get too horrid here. The headpiece is fanned into multiple of these feather-looking things, almost looking like cutting this headpiece apart would reveal more of these purple feathers. I'm pretty sure this is actually the drop we get from her from defeating her being just one of these feathers. Aside from that, they don't really have much more than being striped and having a nice gradient, and it kind of just acting like a mask for her. And no, I already checked. She doesn't have anything under it. She does have a tongue though. That's interesting. Above this already big headpiece, she has another crown made of tacit cores. She herself has one right in her chest here, so these are either hers or actually ones of other tacit discords. I know it's meant to symbolize that she's like maybe some sort of queen of tacit discords or just that she's above them, but thinking of the hands on her wings, you could make the horrid assumption that these are ones of other tacit discords. Moving further down, we do have the lower half of her face, which is actually quite detailed. Her lips are blue, having a little gradient, and kind of giving off a lipstick vibe, and her neck is actually pretty long if you look at it this way. Ignoring the oddly long neck, her hair seems to be suspended in the air here. The actual echo entry in the databank has more draped hair being draped over her wings, but the projection also has the suspended kind of flowy hair. Regardless, her hair matches her color scheme, being this very pretty dark purple with very subtle light purple highlights. Moving on to her shoulders, they're actually the only thing about her arms that are asymmetrical, being made up of many layers of the feather-like material, being white on the top and the purple gradient below. Now, you won't see me criticizing much practicality in these models, as boss designs are supposed to look cool and they don't actually have to move anywhere besides fighting us maybe, so this is completely fine with me. It does give the vibe of some kind of one-sided guard armor or just This used to be the other side before the hole got blown into her chest, but we'll look at that in a second. Looking at her arms first, you can actually see her joints are pretty doll-like, even starting off as this little ball joint-like nub. Everything about her arm is covered in these little cracks as well as tacitite corruption. And by entire arm, I really mean entire arm. Even the ball joints themselves are cracked up like this, kind of fitting into the theme of the hole in her chest. Looking at this closer, you can see that the different points of the arm are actually just interlocked with each other. You can see that the uppermost arm, kind of shoulder, is slotted into this like cut open part of her arm, and it kind of continues the same way all the way down. The interlocked part itself is lined in gold and has this purple-like flesh inside. Moving further down her arm, you have where her elbow would be. Like I said, this is again interlocked, but this time with a ball joint. She has these kind of ball joints all over, even on her hips, as you will see in a second, really giving off the vibe that she's just a puppet to some puppeteer. Moving down to her hand, which I think is absolutely sick, is her big claws. Her wrist is again a ball joint and moves into these skeleton-like hands. Where usually skin would be, or even the purple flesh, you literally only have a skeleton-like structure left, with even more ball joint looking things in between. The claws she has are golden, kind of like the interlocked lining, and are really just claws. Even if this part is more pointy than this, you could definitely still stab someone with this. Other than that, the underside isn't really interesting, besides the fact that this seems to be slotted over her finger, as you can actually see the outline of where the last part of her finger would be. And lastly, the underside of her arm isn't much different, also having the ball joints, the flesh, the lining, and the cracks, though the underside doesn't really have any tacitite corruption. Talking about tacitite corruption, let's move on to the main part, the hole in her chest and the wings. The hole in her chest kind of seems like the source of all of this tacitite corruption, being her own tacit core. It is kind of slotted into one part of her chest, which kind of looks like it dug into her skin and then made itself a little hole to stay in, which is such a horror thing to think about, but as you can see, the other part of her chest is still intact. The tacit core itself is nothing special, just being a normal tacit core, but as you can see, the hole it's in is made up of multiple layers of purples, blues, and pinks. I wonder if this is what the actual flesh of a tacit discord looks like, or if this is just scarred over. If this was the case, and this is actually flesh, it would mean that all of these other parts, as well as the cuts in her headpiece, are also her flesh. As I've said before, the tacitite corruption seems to be coming from this, as the big hole has multiple paths leading all across her body with this black tar-like substance. Looking at her wings, and I'll actually deactivate the hair for this completely, the wings are completely separate. As you can see in her projection, she actually doesn't have them there. The wings themselves again have the flesh-like pattern and a lot of tacitite corruption. In comparison to the cut parts on her body, the colors here are a lot more doled out, making it look like rotten or scarred parts of her. Besides the various tendrils you can see all over it, kind of looking like feathers even, there's also a lot of hands coming out of this. The hands are strangely realistic. You can actually see through this little line here that the hands were attached afterwards, being morphed onto these tendrils and then being touched up later. The hands are actually really pointy and all seem to be reaching out somewhat. The lower part is much of the same, but kind of looks even creepier with this very artery looking design. Meanwhile, the outside again is duller than the inside. This part I called Little Cape earlier, I actually checked in the game again, and it seems to be a lot more ripped up there. This might just be a in-game visual effects thing that I cannot recreate, but it is kind of cool to see this in its full form. Onto the back of her, and completely contradicting what I just said about it being cool seeing her wings, her back actually has some interesting detail you don't really see in the game, being the back part of this cut-up shoulder, as well as the tacitite corruption somewhat forming a shape. This shape kind of reminds me of a tacit core personally, but I don't really understand why this is hidden, as well as her shoulder blades and all of this little detail. Besides that, the tacitite corruption goes all the way down to her lower back. It isn't elevated in any way and kind of just seems to be building her spine, but you can see that her body is actually cracking more around it. Looking at the second part of tacitite corruption going down from her tacit core, you can actually see this goes all the way down to her lower body, besides obviously afflicting the stability of her body, seemingly causing it to crack in multiple ways, some deeper than others, and even taking off entire chunks of her. It even seems to affect her ball joints, probably ending up corroding everything until her entirety is just the tacitite corruption or she falls apart. Now, of course, it wouldn't be KuroGames without a little belly action. Let's just admire that for a second. Moving further down, we have the same cut-up pattern from the headpiece and her arms. Seemingly only being cut once this time, it again features all of these lines and the gradient, as well as the ball joints that already seem to be corrupting. Front and back here are much of the same, being very cracked and having whole chunks taken out. Aside from that, there isn't much left to say about the legs, aside from all of the same patterns all over. So, moving on to the lower part, her scarily detailed feet, you weirdly enough have two kinds of joints this time. These seem to be ending at the legs, and these seem to be the ankles, but I don't really understand why they're cut up here. The entirety of Dreamless has had human proportions, save her claws, but joint-wise, it has been the same. The sides of her feet have more of her headpiece feathers being cut up even bigger. And getting to the part I've been talking about, kind of like her hands, they look very skeletal and are scarily detailed. Seeing as I haven't really seen many modeled feet in this game, maybe that's just what's throwing me off. But you have to agree, they're very scarily detailed. Now besides this, Kuro actually put in a bonus this time. Usually the models I have don't feature their weapons, but this one, where are they? Actually comes with 3 different types of weapons. I kind of forgot if she uses these in the boss fight, or if I'm just talking out of my ass right now and they just threw this in as a, okay, have them, but these are weapons that seem to be associated with her. Number 1, we have this really cool looking saber. I really wish we get these weapons in game sometime, but this one seems to be a solid kind of tacitite black with a purple inside. The handle features much of the same and is just really pointy. The sword itself, beside being not sharp in the slightest, is pretty roughed up, having multiple scratches all over and even has multiple chunks taken out of it. The second one is a smaller dagger design, featuring much of the same black body, purple inside. It actually doesn't really seem to have a blade. While the other one still resembled a saber somewhat, this one I don't think could really stab anyone. Maybe if you're trying hard enough, I'm not really sure. And lastly, we have a pretty clear one, being a sort of lance. This one could actually kill someone for a change. actually being made up of tacitite this time, having the topmost part this yellow kind of gem that you usually see on them, and then just continues into more and more pointy formations. This again goes all the way down, being mixed with purple and actual tacitite this time, moving all the way down to the handle where it's literally just more of these formations. These three weapons are actually pretty cool in my opinion. I don't really think we could use the middle one, but if there was ever a merchant selling tacit discord weapons, these would be really cool to use. Also imagine getting a pole wielding character. And that, I think, was it for Dreamless's dissection. I think her model is really cool, especially with all the hands, the really big headpiece, and all of the signs of her being corrupted and also being some sort of puppet. I tried to follow your suggestions from the community tab, trying to show more in-game comparisons, as well as doing dissections of tacit discord, so I hope KuroGames keeps giving us these. Little fun fact, 2.0 was actually the first patch they uploaded tacit discord, so I guess me asking it in the community tab matched up kind of well. Currently available are 4 more, I think, than what I asked in a poll on the community tab, so I'll probably put down a poll again. And no, Lorelei is not yet available. But yeah, what do you think about Dreamless? I kind of want her to come back sometime, but I guess we can only wait. I hope you enjoyed, and have a nice day. Bye bye.